Hello, everybody. Welcome to the BasuandGodin Notebook. I'm Marc-Antoine Godin on this Friday, June 20th. I'm with Arpin Basu. Arpin, I've got my glass of water. You have yours?
I've got my glass of water, yeah.
Excellent. And our guest today is Francois Gagnon. Francois, you have your glass of water?
Water is good for fishes. Fish, that's all. I'm swimming in the Coca-Cola again.
There you go. That's on brand. So, hello everybody. And for this episode today, we wanted to invite our good friend Francois Gagnon, who was recently the award winner of the Elmer Ferguson Award, very prestigious award for people in our line of business, in our brethren. So, welcome to the show, Frankie.
It's I'm honored and I'm happy to be with you guys, and it's a first. So I'll make an easy joke for hockey columnists like we are. So there goes the 3-star of the day. So let's have fun.
Okay, that's good. So you're so in a way you're entering the Hall of Fame, right? So do you know how what's going to be the setup for you? How it's going to be officialized? Are you going to be like, is it going to be part of the same ceremony as with the players in November? How is it going to look like?
First thing first, we are invitees at the Hall of Fame. Before, in the Red Fisher era and everything, they were honored members of the Hall of Fame. But I remember there was a story about 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, when Kevin Paul Dupont went to the Hall of Fame, and the people in the Boston Bruins organization were not that happy. So there was a lot of turmoil at the Hall of Fame, and they decided that we were not as honored members as the players or the builders or the referees, but in the Great Hall, there's an area for the Elmer Ferguson and for the Foster Hewitt nominees, and there's a plaque, the same kind of thing that players and builders and referees have. So every year when I used to go there to cover the Hall of Fame ceremony and the GM meeting that follows the Monday, always went there looking at all those guys that I worked with and I read when I was younger. So that's the official part. And on the Monday, November the 10th, there's a dinner for the Elmer Ferguson and the Foster Hewitt. So Mr. Bettman is there. You have your guests of honor that are with you. You receive your jacket at that ceremony. And in the evening, when the players and the builders are introduced and welcome to the Hall of Fame ceremony, James Duthie, if it's him that will host the show on TSN, will at some point will say earlier today, just like they do with the big ceremonies when all the
categories that no one cares about at the Oscars.
That's exactly it. That's exactly. Earlier in the
ceremony, in a ceremony earlier today, here are the winners for best sound engineering, and best this and best that.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. So that's how it's going to work. But whatever the way and whatever the fact that you are just an invitee or a guest or whatever you want to call it, to be
in the antichambre of the Hall of Fame.
The antichambre of the Hall of Fame is something great anyway. It's been a couple of weeks now that I've received that news. That was very moving to me. I've never even dreamed of receiving that kind of honor. For the last 3 weeks, it's been surreal, and you're happy on one side, you're proud, everything, and on the other side, you sit back and you say, "Why me?" And you think at all your fellow reporters around the NHL that I met in the Stanley Cup final, and I say, "Well, Russo should be there," and Zeiss would be
He
there.
will be.
He will
Yeah.
be, you know. So
Yeah.
all those guys, and you say, okay, it was like, as we say in French, les astres were alignés. So the stars were all aligned for me, and somebody, you know, put on my name on the sheet, and others believed that it was a good idea. So I'm grateful, I'm blessed, and I'm could not be more happy and proud.
So, and it's very well deserved, Frankie, whether you think so or not. I think this is one of the most important hockey markets in the world, and the people who set the agenda and set the conversation in this market should be properly honored. And I think that's what's happening here. You've done that for a very long time. Any fan of this team is not properly informed about it if they don't read you and haven't read you for, what is it, 30 years now you've been covering the team,
Yeah,
somewhere around there? Yeah.
yeah,
So
exactly.
it's significant. And so I know this is kind of might only be interesting to Marc Antoine and I, and hopefully our listeners are too. But you know, I started covering the team in 2000. I think that you had just moved over to Le Soleil at the time from Le Droit, and so I can speak to the difference of covering this team then and covering this team now. But when I started, I was a stringer. I just did games. I worked for CP. I wasn't on the beat necessarily. You've been on the beat for that long. Um, how is the nature of your work changed most significantly in that time? Um, in your opinion, just how is it better and how is it worse?
The biggest change, and it's a huge one. The biggest change is the fact that we don't have the same kind of rapport with the players. But
Mhm.
you have to understand that when I started this job in Ottawa, covering the Ottawa Senators, the Senators were not flying charter, maybe once or twice or three times a year. So they were flying commercial. So we were flying U.S. Airways, which doesn't exist, which is
Yeah,
shows you that I've been there for too long. So
right.
we were flying Ottawa, Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh, the world. And so waiting for flights in airports, waiting for luggage at airports, you would see players, you would talk to players, not about hockey, but about life anyway. You know, they would ask you, you have a family? And so you create some sort of relationship that when they see you in the room, they don't just look at you like, oh, here comes the mob, here comes the reporters that they want to bury us, or they are looking for trouble, so in those years you could talk with a guy and have a real good story, and you could understand because so and so was happening in his life that he could have some difficulties on the ice. They are human. We are
Mhm.
human. And in those years it was great, and that's those years were great for me because I've been working like that all my career. You want to know something? It's not a question of being nice always. It's a question of being fair. And when, a player knows you out of the job and he knows that you're fair, and you talked about few things in airports or in restaurants or around a beer because you cross path, the day before or the day after a game, and you tell the guy, what's wrong? Is there something wrong? Your place seemed to be, and we could talk about it. And
Mhm.
I gave that story a couple of times, and I'm glad to share it with you guys. But I remember that Steve Duchesne was traded to Ottawa. He was really not happy about it. I called him a few days before him coming in, and he said it's not the best news the kind of news I was expecting, and he was blunt about it. So when he showed up in Ottawa, he looked at me and says, "Wow, it was not the best way for me to come in." But I said, "Doesn't matter. You're a great player, and you'll be able to. People will love you." And during the course of the season, everybody understood who he was, and at some point he had a pitfall in his season. So one game goes, two games goes, three, 4 games, and I remember one day I say, "What's wrong?" And he looks at me, says, I don't want to talk about it. I said, I don't want to write about it. I want to understand. And he explained me that his son had a vision problem, and the news broke the week before, and him and his wife could not understand what it was and how severe it was. And so we talked for about 15 minutes. We were sitting next to each other in a commercial flight. And after a few minutes of reflection, and I say, I'm sorry for you, sorry for your wife. And I say, Steve, I need to write that story. People need to know what's happening to you to understand what's happening on the ice. Oh, he said, I don't want to make that public and everything. And, so we stopped talking. And after 5-10 minutes, he said, well, if you show me the copy before, I'm going to let you do it. I said, I've never done that. I will never done that. You have to trust me and trust my judgment and trust my professionalism to make sure that the story you gave me will help people understand what's happening. So he said, go. So I did the story, and, it was funny in Ottawa because the Francophones were not interesting my friends from the Sun and the Gazette, so or the Citizen, I should say. I'm sorry, in Ottawa. And the day after, they all came at him, and then the news came around, and everything you could hear on radio, on talk radio, was poor Steve, and we are gonna support him. We understand what's going on. And he came a couple of days after. He says, "Well, thank you," and I said, "Don't thank me. I did my job. Thank you to have accepted to share the story, and because it was important." Same thing with injured players in those years. The fans today don't know how hard they are working. And the teams, for some reason that I can't understand and will certainly never accept, don't want us to write about those stories. And they are pivotal for fans to understand how grueling it is when a guy is hurt, to go in the gym, to go to therapy every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day, to make sure he's going to come back. And then we are not able to talk to them. They come back. People say, well, he was gone for a while. I don't know if it was serious or not. And the teams now don't, I don't want to use the media, but they don't give to the media the access to the players that would benefit the players. They look at the media like something that's going to be bad for them, which is completely in reverse when you're an open book and when you give the chance to your players to give out information that make the fan understand it's good for the team, it's good for the player, it's good for everybody.
So, Francois, you might have touched a button there and turned off your camera while you were talking. Just say, there you are.
Yeah, we didn't want to cut you off, but yeah, but
that's it. You were quite on the run there, but that's fine. But yeah, it's an interesting point because it would be one thing to argue as reporters that it's for the benefit of everybody, including the players, to discuss injuries and whatnot. And people would say, oh, of course, well, you're reporters and it's also in your own interest. But the way the fans are attached to their players, the way that they cheer for them, they support them, and they always give the players the benefit of the doubt, they would be even more supportive if they knew what's really happening. And they would be behind them even more if they're able to put in perspective what is exactly the issues that those players are dealing with, But at the same time, it might be trying to put the genie back in the bottle to hope for that thing to happen, because I to a certain extent, that ship has sailed.
I agree. And that's why, I'm 62 years old now. I have less in front of me than I have behind me. And I'm looking at you guys, and I try to understand what's going to be the job in 2, in 5, in 10 years from now. And for me, that's difficult. You look at the reality of so many United States team that there's no longer a paper in the city. TV stations don't cover the team, and some news outlet decide that they don't cover the team because it's really expensive. I just came back from the Stanley Cup Finals. It's a lot of money, but if you want to get something out of the official news, you have to be there. You guys know it. I know it, and.
Yeah.
And the news directors and editors everywhere, they know it, but there's some financial constraints now that make news outlet decided that they don't travel. And that's another thing that makes the job so tough. It's because now the teams control things. They have their own employees that are doing the job, and they are doing a decent job. I mean, there's nothing wrong to be a corporate writer. It's a job, and it's an honest job, and they do an honest job. They will only get one side of the story, but hey, that's okay. They work for the Montreal Canadiens or the New Jersey Devils or the Washington Capitals, and that's their boss. My boss at RDS, and ultimately, my boss is the fans, are the fans that want to know more than the one-sided story. So when you get everything on Zoom and you talk to somebody and you have a camera behind you that is, and put it on a social media from the team, and it could be any team here. It's not only the Canadians that are doing that; it's all the teams. And then you realize that your story was, or the answer of the question that you asked, is already on social media, and you have not digest the answer. You did not try to understand what was the meaning to put that into perspective. So everything now is right here, right now. We give the fact as soon as we can get it, the answer, and there's no longer any perspective. And that for me is a real problem. That's another big difference. To come back to your first question, Arpin, that's one of the big difference of what it was then and what it is now. And it's funny because when I started the job, the Red Fishers of the world would tell you, it's so boring now. Before we could go out with the guys and, we knew. And now, 25, 30 years later, I'm telling you guys, I don't understand how you're going to be able to make it. And it's the circle. I mean, life goes on and it's going to be different. But now there's so much money involved in TV rights. And so that the TV rights people, they want to gain something and some access.
Yeah.
And if they gain something, reporters lose it on the other hand. So this is what makes the job so tough right now.
Yeah, I think my hope is that, and I think you really saw it during COVID, right? When everything was on Zoom. My hope is that as that continues to become more of a thing where everything's available for everyone to consume if they want in real time. Personally, I mean, I look at it as a challenge that, okay, if it's going to take me 1 or 2 hours to get something out based on that same content that's already out there, it has to be that much better, right? It has to be,
that's right.
You have to give people a reason to read it. So I find, or I hope at least, that'll almost elevate our role in the sense that, we have to find something that you didn't get watching the live stream on Twitter, just on the answer to your specific question, and it makes you think about your questions more. Anyhow, let's hope that's the case, because it could also mean that we'll just become obsolete and we won't have jobs anymore. So both possibilities exist, but I think I find that's something that you often do. You're worried about the context and the perspective. Like that's what you've done for your career, is provide that, and so. And you're being rewarded for it. So, and we're all very happy that you're doing that. So we're not going to spend this whole episode just talking about Francois Gagnon and how awesome you are. No. But even though we could go on for hours, but we're not going to. But we've reached a point in the off season here where the off season's actually begun. The Stanley Cup has been awarded. The Florida Panthers are getting drunk in South Florida, as is going to be tradition, I think, over the next few years.
At a spot that you know pretty well, Francois, Elbow Room in Fort Lauderdale. You've been there once or twice.
The world famous Elbow Room, yes. I've been there a few times.
The wildly overrated Elbow Room, I would say.
There's nothing overrated about the Elbow Room. It's the spirit. I mean, it's
It's
Sorry,
fine. It's fine. It's a
I don't
bar.
want
It's
them to.
fine.
I hope they will not. It's there's nothing nice there but nice people. I mean,
Yes.
people that want to have fun, and now you can talk hockey at the elbow room as much as you can talk hockey at any pub, around the Bell Center, and that's great. That's fun, and it's certainly different than it was when the Panthers moved down to Florida. Well,
Yes.
moved from Miami to Fort Lauderdale said in those
Right.
years.
Okay. Hold on. Before we get to the off season part, I just want to, regarding the elbow room, Francois, can you tell us the story about the one time that you danced with a lady?
I've danced, I dance with
It's
anybody
the one time.
who dance.
No,
I don't know if
no.
there's only been one time.
She was actually with her boyfriend at the bar, right? Was it at the elbow room?
Yeah, and she asked me to dance, and actually, I was dancing. That song "Dancing with Myself." I think that was written for me because if there's if there's a song that I like, I jump on the floor. I don't ask, "You want to dance?" or something. No, I go and I dance. And
Yeah.
the way I dance, I have to dance by myself because nobody can follow anything.
Because people might get injured. Because people yes.
There's no
Everybody's kung fu writing was also written for you, but keep going.
Probably that's true. So there she is, and she's dancing with me. And I look at her boyfriend and I say, maybe your boyfriend will not like the fact that you're dancing with somebody that you don't know. And she said, "Oh, don't mind him. He's blind." So that's the part of the story I think that you were looking for.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, off season, Arpin, I'll let you continue with your.
I mean, so I think Canadiens fans, ever since Game 5 against the Capitals, have been sort of waiting for the Canadiens for this offseason to start. And I would be interested to hear your perspective because we've been talking about it to our listeners how, maybe this is not the ideal offseason for the Canadiens to be overly aggressive or to do something overly impactful. But I'm curious to hear your perspective on how you think or how you anticipate the Canadiens attacking the next week and a half or so, where a lot of movement's going to happen around the league. What place do you think the Canadiens have in that movement?
If I was the GM, I would certainly be aggressive and focusing on things that will not give me result right here, right now, or some result, but more in 2 years or 3 years. And I'm not talking draft here. I mean, they've drafted well. They have a pool of really young talent that is really interesting, but there's a gap in the middle. I'll give you the perfect example that I witnessed. Stanley Cup final. You have the Florida Panthers. That was so deep that the Edmonton Oilers could not deal with that. The third and the fourth line of the Oilers, it was a mismatch for the Panthers. Fifth and sixth D of the Oilers, it was a mismatch with Kulikov and Nate Schmidt. That revert his career this year in Florida, or South Florida, I should say. So the Canadiens are at a stage where they can bring some key players to bring experience, to add to the culture of winning and what they are building for the last 2-3 years, and something that is missing. Everybody's thinking about the number 2 center. That's true. But even though guys did a great job on third and fourth line last year, if you look at what happened in the Stanley Cup Finals, you see that the Montreal Canadiens beat 4 times in this regular season were absolutely not the same in the playoff because they took their game to another level. And the Canadiens, as good as they were from mid-December to the end of the season, well, they didn't have that jump in the playoff. They were kicked out of the first round by the Washington Capitals in 5 games, and then the Capitals were not able to deal with the Carolina Hurricanes. That should explain to the fans that when it gets serious, and I mean real serious in the playoff, the Canadiens are not there yet. But to get there, they need to get better, stronger, bigger in some ways, but certainly stronger and more experienced. So I would be aggressive in any fashion. Trade, offer sheet, free agents signings, if the guys that are there and that are ready are guys that I believe will take this team to another level next year, the year after, and in 3 years. So I would not go further than 3 years if I'm looking for a veteran. I don't want to get the guy that I will overpay and say, I'm going to give you a 5 or a 6 year deal. No. And then I'm going to use Sidney Crosby as an example. Sidney Crosby in Montreal would be he would be a perfect fit anywhere. Let's put it this way. But when you look at the first line or so-called first line of the Canadiens, you have Nick Suzuki, who's a legit number one center in the NHL, who is learning to be as good offensively as defensively, who will be a serious candidate for a Selke trophy in years to come. And he will be, 80, 85, 90 point guy, a season guy. So that's huge, but he needs help. And he needs somebody that's going to be able to tell him, okay, you're really good. Follow my footstep or let me push you a little bit and you'll get that much better. A guy like Sidney Crosby is that guy. If it's Sidney Crosby, it's great. And personally, I would give a lot to get Sidney Crosby in Montreal for 3 years. But if it's not him, there's some other guys can do the job. Maybe not as well as Crosby, because I really think that Crosby has a place in the elite of the NHL for at least 2, maybe 3 more years. So that would be the kind of move that I would do. If I'm not able to get Crosby, I would look at the young McTavish if he's still available to get an offer sheet at some point, because here's a young centerman that could be really good, that can be as good on the wings. So if Michael Age comes in 2 or 3 years and he's as good as a centerman as we believe he's going to be, then you can move McTavish. But I want to put some strength on my top 6, and I want to put some experience and size on my bottom 6 to make sure that this team will not only make the playoffs next season, but will force Francois Gagnon to say, it's going to be easy for Washington in 5. I want next season, when the Canadiens will come to the first round, I want to make sure that I'm going to tell Arpon Basu and Marc-Antoine Godin and Francois Gagnon and all the fans, well, you should think that we might push that in 7 and we have a chance to win. And that would be a huge, huge step compared to what it was this season.
Well, whether it's Crosby or another veteran, I think that one of my main arguments lately has been that you don't have to look only at the impact that veteran player would have immediately on the Canadiens roster, but you have to look also at the percolating effect of that veteran and his leadership and his experience on the younger players, and how he could help those young players getting better and figuring some things out. Because the fact that they have so few veterans around them, the likes of Caulfield and Slavkovsky, Demidov, even Suzuki, I mean, it would be good if they had more veterans to set the examples for them. And it doesn't have to be Crosby, but he's, in that sense, having guys who are there more on the shorter term, I think they would also, that would definitely be a side benefit. It's not only what that veteran brings, it's also how much better he can make those young players become. So,
and the heritage, as you said, that he will leave back. I spoke a couple of times during the finals to Corey Perry. That's a perfect example. He was here, and the Canadiens get to the Stanley Cup final for some odd reason, but they got there anyway. And he was an asset. And then he moves out, and 3 years, 4 years after, he is still a great asset for the Edmonton Oilers in a second year in a row in the Stanley Cup finals. And you know what? He could be still an asset next year. And that guy was in the organization. Now, it's easy now to say that was a mistake to let him go, but, those type of guys, And I say type of guys because I don't want to put names, but those type of guys are so important. I vote for Brad Marchand. It was until the end, before the last game, I had Sam Bennett #1 on my ballot for the Connie Smythe Trophy. And I switched. Actually, I switched and I said to the NHL, I said, if Bennett score a goal tonight, you put Bennett in front of Marchand. But neither of them scored, so he stayed second. And the only reason why I put Marchand in front of Bennett at the end, it was for everything that I saw Marchand do in practices. He was there first on the ice. He was one of the last one to go out. And he stayed at some point with the Black Aces that were doing some horrendous drills. And the guy would just make his first step to go with a puck. He would just push the puck with his stick and laugh at the guy. He was doing that to Barkov. He was doing that to the other guys that were practicing around him. And he brought a spirit and the intangibles that the Marchand of the world bring to a team that is already good makes that team better. And that's for the goals that he scored, the breakaway, everything that he did that was outstanding. But that tiny little piece more that he did, doing pranks with some players. He did one to A.G. Greer that went to his skates to undo his skate, les lacets of his skates, and he looks at, there was a message that I won't repeat here because it's PG-14.
No, you can repeat. You can say whatever you want on this podcast. Go ahead.
I don't want to say it because
Okay.
it involves some words starting with F. It's not Francois. Let's put it this way. and Greer just laughed as you guys did, and he said, Marshy. And it was like that, like in France, Newman, okay? But he was he's there, he's everywhere. He brings something. So I talked about Perry with Edmonton. I just talked about Marchand. Those type of guys, Montreal Canadiens need them to get to the next level because Nick Suzuki cannot do that. He's already doing more than his fair share. He's learning on the way. He needs somebody to show him the ropes. And as I said, not bring him up, just push him a little bit, explaining him, you're a captain now. You're the captain. I would suggest this or that or that, and helping him to get better. And the same thing for the goal scorers. They are going 3, 4, 5 games without a goal. They are down something. A guy like Perry or Marchand could bring something interesting. And obviously those two guys will be available. But again, I'm not saying the Canadiens need to go after those guys, especially Marchand, who's going to make an obscene amount of money and maybe a more obscene number of years. And if I can choose, I'm willing to give a lot of money to those kind of guys, but I'm not willing to give him too many years because that's when you hurt your team really much. Money is only money. And it's the owner who pays. So that's not us. So Mr. Molson is rich enough to make sure that if they waste a couple of millions on a guy, that's not going to matter to the fans. But if you waste years on a guy, that can bring your team down. And that's mistakes that are going to be made at the July 1st free agency market and will be repeat afterwards because there will be some, how you say that in English, surenchère. There will be people overpaying for players because a guy like Sam Bennett, who probably wants to stay in Florida, but his agent will come with 10, 12, 15 offers and say, by the way, you have 5 or 6 offers at 10 million more. And he will say, what? So he's not going to be a poor man if he accepts 8 times 8 in Florida, but he's going to leave on the table easily $2 million a year if he wants to stay there.
Yeah. Well, Sam Bennett just announced to a packed house at some nightclub in Miami last night that he's not fucking leaving. that was his message.
It's like the Wolf of Wall Street, right?
The Wolf of Wall Street. He pulled that. It's very well done. A guy who fits that description of the guy that you're describing is someone who has not signed in Ottawa yet. Is Claude Giroux.
Yeah.
Which I'm wondering what's going on there and why that hasn't happened yet. But
how about Brent Burns? Do you think Brent Burns would fit that mold too?
interesting. I wonder. I mean, he's still big and strong. I wonder if does he still have what it takes to make sure that he can give to a team. Is he another Corey Perry? Is he able to do what Corey Perry is doing now? And he was doing it in a really, really deep team on the blue line. So Montreal will not be that deep. So will he be exposed? And that at that point, that becomes a problem for a veteran, because if you want a message to go through, you have to make sure that you don't look bad on the ice game in and game out. And I don't mean that Burns would look bad that much, but if he's not on a suitable chair for him, if just like David Savard, too much was asked to David Savard in the last year, and he was not able to sustain that. He was a great teammate. He was a great leader. He was probably a great teacher for the kids. But on the other hand, for people watching the game, he was too slow. He was not able to deal with the reality of the season 25-26. But is Brent Burns able to do it? Well, if he is, and again, I don't mind the money, I mind the years. If you don't go more than 1 or 2 years, it could be interesting. But there's, look at Nate Schmidt, for example. I mean, there was a storyline between Nate Schmidt and Paul Maurice because of Winnipeg, obviously. But, Nate Schmidt vanished for a while, and we were wondering, does he still have hockey? And he comes there at what was $800 a season, and then suddenly in the playoff, he's on the third pair, of course, with Kulikov. But those guys were so effective. He was on the power play unit. He was involved. So they are guys like that are available and have a greater value than some names that seems to be obvious. And that's why the GM needs to be surrounded by some great pro scouts that will tell him, you know what? Gagnon is good. He has a good resume. He's big, he's strong, but he's going to ask for that much money. And I think that either Basu or Godin would take a lot less money. They don't have a big name as a big name as he is, but he's going to be so much better for us. And then the GM listen, reflect, trust his pro scouting team, and says, okay, let's go for those guys. And they get a Nate Schmidt. And that's what Bill Zito did. And that's one of the numerous reason why the Florida Panthers were so strong against this year. Didn't seem that strong later on in the regular season because of injuries and other things. But when they pushed the switch on, especially in the second round, losing 0-2 against Toronto, then they start winning, and you said, okay, now they are for real, and they will be there until the end, and they won the cup.
Well, I mean, the reality is the Panthers have done that. Their whole team is built that way, of finding guys that were undervalued elsewhere, like their entire team. I mean, you just talked about AJ Greer. That was another free agent signing where it seems like no one really pays attention to it on July 1st, but that's a guy they plucked out. Obviously the obvious ones are Reinhart and Bennett, but they've done that. What I think the Panthers demonstrate is that it's not enough to just do it once. The Panthers did it 8 times, basically, where they found guys. E2 Lewis,
Forsling, Verhaeghe.
Well, Forsling for sure. Verhaeghe for sure.
Was waivers. Yeah, that's right.
It was waivers. Luostarinen, they got from Carolina in the Trocheck deal. And when they dealt Trocheck to Carolina, no one made a big deal about E2 Luostarinen going back. He's a second-round pick. He was a decent prospect, but no one really, in my recollection, no one thought much of the fact that the Panthers got this guy. That's how you build winning teams, is when you can pluck a guy like Luostarinen out of a trade where seemingly what you're getting back are basically futures, and they got Eric Howla in that deal, but it was like, this is the guy that they turned Vincent Trocheck into, this guy who in back-to-back years has been phenomenal in the playoffs for them. So it's not enough to just do it once. And it's interesting, you mentioned pro scouting. This is one area of the Canadiens that hasn't really been tested under this administration is the pro scouting, because they haven't been in this mode where they have to find guys like they're looking for guys like this, And I think the first test was basically the Alexandre Carrier trade, which was probably the
Outstanding.
best in season trade in the league, arguably, at least one of them. But yeah, I'm curious to see what this pro scouting group can do, because it's Kent Hughes and Jeff Gordon have brought guys in. Teddy Purcell's a pro scout for them. Like they brought in some guys, basically Kent Hughes' old client list to come in and pro scout for them. But it'll be interesting to see how they can contribute to this build, because they haven't really been called upon much so far.
I agree, and that's a perfect example of the growth of the Canadiens. For the last 3, 4, 5 years, amateur scout were pivotal for the Canadiens, and they gave them some really good picks, and that's perfect. But now, if you want to get to the other stage, you still need to have some good picks here and there. But the Florida Panthers probably will bring a new trend, and we'll see that, okay, draft picks are important. You have to renew your players, but it's one thing to have 2 good picks every year, but we don't need 4 or 5. So you make sure you tell your amateur scout, make sure that what you get is real, is legit. And it's certainly not a perfect science. I mean, out of 7 picks, if included your first round to your 7th rounder, if you get 2.5 guys that make it more than 100 games in the NHL, you're doing a really decent job. So it's not going to be easy. But now the Canadiens are at another level that they need to make some more than decent trades. Like Alexandre Carrier, as you said, was a great example. So you look at your defensive core and you say, I bet on which one I really want to keep, which one has a good value as trade-wise, and what can I get in return? And that's something that sometimes we don't understand. Like, a team could really and I'm going to say a name here just for the sake of the argument. A team could so much like Arbor Jackeye that they would be willing to give twice the value. And Jackeye is a really good young defenseman. He is a superstar in Montreal. He's a stud when he drops the glove. But if the value that you get in return is greater, look, Shea Weber and PK Subban, on the public relation market, that trade never made sense for the Montreal Canadiens. Hockey-wise, it was an unbelievably good trade. And the fact that Weber played longer, even though he was injured at the end than PK, is a great example. I, for one, thought that trade would look back when Weber would retire and PK would still be good for 3, 4 more years. But that reality never occurred. So hockey-wise, it's even better a trade because of the reality of the 2 players.
Okay, I wanted to get you on a different tangent, different topic here, because there's a guy on Long Island named Noah Dobson whose name is floating around a little bit these days. Obviously, the Islanders have the first overall pick. They are likely to draft Matthew Schaefer, who is perceived as a future number 1 defenseman. So in an effort to get younger, the Islanders could consider Schaefer to be their number 1 D of the future, and then they've got Noah Dobson, who's a right-handed defenseman, who's a year away from free agency, but he needs a new contract for next season. Some say that if everything's falls in order, he might command up to $10 million a year. I don't know if he's worth that, but it's an interesting situation that the Islanders are in, because they have to consider, what do we do with this guy? Do we pay him number 1 D money, knowing that down the road we're most likely are going to have a defenseman that's better than him? Or do we just buy time, keep him for a bit? Or do we try to maximize what we can get for him in return by trading him? I mentioned the fact that he's a right-handed defenseman. He's only 25 years old. Do you think that it would be How interesting do you think that Noah Dobson could be for Montreal?
There should be some interest there. Noah Dobson offensively, I'm willing to give him the amount of money he wants and the number of years he wants. And defensively, I look at him a bit like a Evan Bouchard type of player. Evan Bouchard is going to ask for an obscene amount of money, and he's got to get an obscene amount of money because he's so gifted offensively. Probably more even than Noah Dobson, who had an outstanding season 2 years ago. This year was maybe, but you cannot evaluate any players on the island this year because of the reality of that team. Now, that being said, if Mathieu Dash wants to make a huge statement right now to start over his team, he can deal him. But you have to make sure you cannot miss. If that's your first big move, it has to be a home run. Because if you strike out on your first big move, that's especially in a market like New York, everybody will remember that forever. And you will need to do 4 Grand Slam. And even after that, people will say, well, you remember he struck out at the first time that he did. So for me, that is a very, very delicate situation. But on the other hand, and I put that quote unquote, with the defensive weaknesses of Noah Dobson, am I willing to go 8 years at 10? Understanding that the cap is going up, that's fine. But if you give that much to that type of player, and in few years you realize that, I'm overpaying him, and I will need to overpay some other guys that are getting better, even a greater salary than he gets, that's could be very difficult for a young GM. So, and I'm circling around here, and what I would try to do is to maximize the value in a trade. Now, is Montreal a team that could need him? Obviously. I mean, many teams that are looking for a player that could give a stronger power play and a stronger upside offensively should look at Noah Dobson. Now, fans in Montreal believe, and I'm convinced they are right, that the offensive part of the blue line will be taken care of by Lennartson for the years to come. But I would just say, and I don't want to undermine anything that Lennartson did this year, but just look at what happened in Vancouver with Quinn Hughes, that had outstanding numbers in regular season. The playoffs are a different beast. The teams that are playing you are playing differently. The physicality is different. And I don't mean that they're going to go for your head all the time, but finishing checks is something that some nights in regular season, players, I don't do it tonight. In the playoff, they do it or they die. And that's the reason why Florida was so good. So if Montreal believe, or the fans believe, that everything could go with Lennartson, I say, I'm sorry. As good as he is, he cannot do it all by himself. Cale Makar is outstanding. And he's so good that we don't realize how good is Devon Taves playing with him. And at some point, Lennartson will need a Devon Taves. He will need somebody really strong to help him. Matheson could be the guy for now, but in a year, 2 or 3, maybe not. So is Mailloux that kind of guy? Any other defenseman, Reinbacher, or some other guys able to do that? I'm not convinced yet. I know what Noah Dobson can give, and that's the discussion that probably around the table that Kent Hughes have with everybody in his staff, and say, okay, is Reinbacher ready to be Noah Dobson in 3 years or in 2 years? And if everybody around the table say he will never be that, then the Canadiens have to find something else. But if around the table everybody's able to convince Kent Hughes that Reinbacher will be your Noah Dobson, or will be not as gifted offensively, but defensively, he will be a stud even better than Dobson, then don't waste your money on Dobson, because you will need to pay Reinbacher in a few years. So this is all the the great aspect of hockey, that you're sitting in front of your huge boards, you have many names, you have pluses and minuses to every name, and you're looking at that and you say, okay, which one is the best for me? And that's why I love our job, because we can talk forever. And then in 2 years, we will do the same conversation. And I will be the first one to tell you, was I wrong on this one? Or I will pump my chest and say, we were right on that one. But we are doing that for fun. Those guys are doing that to make a team get to the Stanley Cup. That's a lot tougher about your pressure in the pressure situation.
Yeah, we do talk about it forever, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. But how
Yes,
about you? Do you
constantly.
like Dobson?
Yeah.
Do you want Dobson in
I mean,
Montreal?
I know when you talk about Reinbacher, like when they drafted Reinbacher, the guy they had in mind was Dobson. The guy that they saw him as a future Dobson. Like that was really the main player comparison internally that the Canadians were sort of bouncing around, was this guy could turn into a Noah Dobson, and you can't get a Noah Dobson by a trade, which is why it's funny that his name is floating around out there as being potentially available via trade. The issue I have, and this is what I want to get you on this, because you hypothetically mentioned Arbor Jacki as a trade, and it just it was purely hypothetical, right? But I'm sure there's at least one person who is listening to this podcast who's like, "Don't you dare trade Arbor Jacki!" Like there's and the Canadians have tons of guys like this. Like, to get a Noah Dobson, you're not going to get him with draft picks and prospects. You're going to have to pluck someone off the team and send him to New York, because Mathieu Darche has no interest in making the Islanders worse in the short term. And the only reason he would entertain trading someone like Noah Dobson is to make his team better. So it's going to take a package of players that's going to make that work. So to you, when you look at the Canadians, how many real untouchables do you see? How many guys do you look at on that team and say, there's no way they could trade him? Because I think the numbers might be a little smaller than most people believe.
Actually, the number is kind of small.
Yeah.
For me, there's absolutely no opening for discussion. Nick Suzuki, because of who he is now and who I can see will be in few years, for me is the untouchable. Blaine Hudson is the same, because with what he showed at his first season, he will get better, and I don't want to move him.
Mm.
I put Demidov in that equation because I haven't seen enough. Okay?
Yeah.
For me is the reason why I want to keep him, to make sure. And I will say that's about it. So,
Yeah.
Slav, of course. If you want to get Sidney Crosby, you're going to pay something big. And people will tell me, well, I can't believe you would be willing to trade Cole Caulfield. Well, I'm willing to trade Cole Caulfield if the result is good on my side. And the reason why I would say that Demidov for me is an untouchable and Caulfield is not is just because I don't know yet what Demidov is going to give me. I know what Caulfield is. I know what he's giving to my team. And if the return is as good as I believe it can be, I'll be willing to part ways with him, because Demidov might be able to fill that role. But, and that's the reason. Don't you dare trade this guy and this guy and this guy. Okay. But, I know that the Montreal Canadian fans are very passionate about their players, but some players are not as great as we believe they are. And it's not true that you will get a superstar player for a really good one who plays in Montreal and that you love him passionately. Speaking about Jacki. And I don't want to trade Jacki again, but
Yeah.
he's the perfect type of guy that you believe you're close to a deal, and then you throw another name to make sure it's going to happen. And then suddenly, that's the pivotal point. The trade, both GMs are thinking, okay, I'm willing to give you Jacki or a Jacki. I'm adding him to the equation, and then you get your guy. And that's why I believe that the Canadians are in a good spot to make a big deal, because they have really young players that are already good, that are attractive on the long term for a team that will be willing to give a free agent to be or a young guy that early 30s that is already there. But those guys are really expensive, and the fans they will need to understand that and be willing to accept that, which is easier said than done.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I pretty much have the same Untouchables list than you. I'm not sure I agree with, tying a Slavkovsky to any hypothetical Crosby deal. And I understand your argument, but to me, whether it's Slavkovsky, Caulfield, or someone else, if you go and get one of your more talented young players, it would be to go after a fairly young asset. Not necessarily someone who's
Noah
on
Dobson.
the back. Exactly. Someone who's not necessarily someone who's in the back nine of his career and who's in a very, very specific, situation where the team is rebuilding and all that stuff. But no, otherwise, when it comes to Untouchables, last time I noticed last time I checked, the Canadiens did not win a round. They've changed a lot since their Stanley Cup finals in 2021.
They won a game.
They won one game. So there should not, on that sort of team, there should not be that many Untouchables. So yeah, Suzuki, Hudson, and Demidov, that's pretty much it though.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, that's the thing. That's why I find this time to be so interesting for Montreal. It's tough because I feel like the market is flooded. There's so many teams trying to do what Montreal is trying to do. But if they put names like Caulfield, Slavkovsky, Reinbacher, Mailloux, Xhekaj, you mentioned, Goulet, like if they actually start if they start sincerely talking about names like that, then they could start making some really impactful moves. I don't know where they're at in terms of their willingness to move guys like that. I think they are willing, and I think we saw it early on with this administration. The Romanov trade was pretty bold, and that was a player that Canadiens fans loved, and they did it anyway. And so I think that's one past behavior thing where we could be like, okay, they're willing. They don't really, not that they don't care, but they're not afraid to trade a player the fan base loves if it means getting a player that they think the fan base will love. It hasn't worked out yet in that trade, but they've shown they're not afraid to do that.
Yeah. Francois,
you said.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to jump in for a second because Arpon said a name. He said the name Goulet, and Goulet for me is that close to be an untouchable.
Oh yeah,
and
100%.
The only I mean, I like everything that I see about Goulet on and off the ice. I often compare Goulet to Wade Redden. When I saw Wade Redden come in Ottawa as a young defenseman who became pivotal to the team, quiet, all business, big, strong, and the only reason why I didn't put him there as an untouchable, and it's not his fault, is the situation with injuries that I'm wondering. Some players are injury prone, and doesn't make them bad players or bad person. It's just a fact. It's just like that. Suzuki, 82 games a season.
The opposite of prone. Yeah,
that's right. So that's for me. That brings a stronger value to the package. But Goulet for me is this far from being an untouchable.
Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned Wade Redden and the Ottawa Senators. There are some guys who we're scared because they're injury prone, but Daniel Alfredsson, in the first 5 or 6 years of his career, was extremely injury prone. And all of a sudden, he seemed to figure it out. His luck changed, and he became a lot more durable than he was early on. So I don't know if a guy like Goulet, for example, who's had a string of bad luck. I mean, his latest injury with when he had his leg sliced by a skate is really something that's caused by being, prone to injuries, or it's just a fluke. But I mean, I understand the reservation. And I think that maybe somewhere the fact that he got he did not have a max year deal and only a 6-year deal. It had maybe something to do with durability issues back then. But what I wanted to ask you, and it's maybe a little bit going in the nitty gritty of roster building, but the Canadiens are going to have to ask themselves big questions in the coming days. And do we get help at center, whether it's for second line center, third line center, or fourth line center? And I look at the roster right now, and the Canadiens just had a great season from Anderson and Gallagher. Their main centerman was Christian Dvorak. And I think the instinct was say, well, let's try not to touch anything, because they've been, those two veterans, we've been able to bring them back and make them relevant again. And they've done such a good job at that. So I guess I'm not talking about bringing Dvorak back, but my first instinct would be to say, well, if you want to keep those two guys together, Jake Evans could probably do some sort of, a good job at centering those two guys. They played together, all three of them, very early in the season. But then, is it your third line or is it your fourth line? And if it's your third line, then it becomes a potentially very weak fourth line with I don't know who apart from Emil Heinemann. So do you think that there's a need for the Canadiens to make sure that Anderson and Gallagher are going to continue to play together next season? And how much that should be involved in the way that they're going to decide which way to go at the center position, especially in the bottom six?
For me,
I know it's pretty specific, but I mean,
yeah, it is. But it's interesting. It's interesting because 2 years ago, everybody was yelling about Anderson contract and about Gallagher's contract, and they were finished and everything. And this year, they were able to sustain some quality hockey, and nobody talked about the money this year, or a lot less. And for me, the Canadiens will be a good team, a relevant team for the playoff. The team that I was talking about earlier when we say, hey, this is going to go in 7. I'm not sure they're going to, but they will push that to 7. When they'll be able to do that, Gallagher and Anderson will be on a fourth line. Whoever is the centerman, it could be Dvorak. I don't mind, because defensively he could be useful. He's good on faceoff, and Evans could do the job too. He did a really decent job on the defensive side of the puck this season. Remember, Arpon, at some point for the NHL awards, I do my first quarter, half season, third quarter, and at the half season, I told Arpon, yeah, I have the name of Jake Evans in the conversation for the Selke because he was the forward that had logged the more minutes.
What was my reaction, Frankie?
You said,
about that.
because you know me well, you didn't call me a homer.
Right.
But he was there in the equation. And because I like, at my number 5 guy, put the name of a player that deserves to be there for the real defensive value of the game. I mean, I'll never take anything away from Alexander Barkov, especially with what he gave in the finals against the Oilers. But that's another story anyway. So Evans on the fourth line with Anderson and Gallagher, fine. But then you have to replace them on the third line. And we are now in this discussion exactly at the same discussion that Stan Bowman will have with his new staff in Edmonton, saying, okay, our third and fourth line, we're not able to deal with the third and fourth line of the Panthers. So what are we doing? Are we taking the best guys that we have to make a fourth line and we go for some guys that will be able to do a third line, or we do the reverse? And I think that the Canadiens are right there because, those guys are nice players. They are working their tail off. But in the case of Gallagher and Anderson, they are at a stage of their career where they will not get better. They will sustain the load of work, but they will not give more than what they gave this year. At least that's my opinion. And the younger guys, I don't believe they have enough to get to another level. So they don't, when I look at the bottom 6 guys in Montreal, I don't see in those guys somebody that could push somebody out of the first line or solidify the second line. And that's the reason why I was telling you about the pro scouting department of the Canadiens that will need to do a lot of job. They need some other players there. I mean, Joel Armia had an outstanding year with Evans on the PK. That's fine. But those type of guys are available,
They're replaceable.
every day. They are replaceable. Montreal needs to look at getting some untouchables, quote unquote, on their second line, so that after that you can build with what you have and go here and there and plug a player on your third and maybe on your fourth and say, okay, we are stronger than we were last year. Because don't get me wrong, every team next year will, at least in some ways, be stronger, or I should say every contender will be stronger than last season. I mean, Pittsburgh will probably not because they're starting a rebuild and everything. But, the Rangers will be tougher to beat next year than they were this season. And
Devils.
the Devils injury situation in Jersey.
Well, that's it.
Completely. Yeah, that's right. Just to get their injured players back will make the Devils better. So it's going to be interesting. So that's why we have to understand that what the Canadiens gave to get to the playoff was wonderful. But we saw a reality in 5 games of the Stanley Cup final, the first round, not the Stanley Cup final, but the first round of the playoff. So to get there and being relevant in the first round and maybe have a chance to get to the second round, they will need to be a lot better than they were. And they will get better not only by the players that will maybe come from Laval, 1 or 2, maybe. Kapanen's going to be, for me, could be an asset on the third line, but then he will not do the job by himself. So they will need to add some players. If no superstars or superstar, just one would be great. Some established player that will bring something strong. And that's easier said than done.
See, so I've been told that Stan Bowman, when he had that meeting, at one point, he stopped and said, I know the answer. We will give Trent Frederick an 8-year contract. That's how we were going to solve this problem. That's a little spy told me that's how that meeting went down in Edmonton. And if the Canadiens can avoid doing that, that would be good.
Yeah, because there is a world where Trent Frederick would have made sense to the Canadiens, but not for 8 years.
They're not on an 8-year contract,
and it's something in the neighborhood of $4 million. I don't know if the nothing's official yet, but that's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah,
it's reminiscent of the Pierre Engvall contract on the island. It's reminiscent of it. Yes, it makes me think of it, and we all know how that. Well, it hasn't ended yet, but we all know how that's in the process of ending for Pierre Engvall. Who good for Pierre Engvall and good for Trent Frederick too.
Yeah, of course, but guys, be ready. July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 5th. We're going to witness some contracts like that because GMs will look at the situation. The cap is going up. They finally find ways to spend some monies, and they will overpay in dollars and in years. And again, I said that before, and I will repeat it. It's a mistake, but it's a short-term mistake to give too much money to a guy. It's a bigger mistake and can become a huge mistake if you give too much money and too many years, because you will be stuck with a guy that you will buy out and then you do that and but you're going to put some money aside that you will not be able to use in a time where the Canadiens will need it the most in 2 years when they'll be ready to win. I don't believe they'll be ready to win next year. They'll be better, but they will not be ready to win in 3 years. Then they will be, and they will need the special money then.
And we have evidence that they're aware of this because of the very public nature of their pursuit of Jonathan Marchessault last year in free agency. And the reason why Jonathan Marchessault signed with Nashville, one of them at least, is that he got more years and more total money from Nashville than Montreal was willing to give him. And so I think, Ken Hughes and Jeff Gorton, this is something that they have top of mind, is that they do not want to mess with that window. Patrick Laine was attractive to them because the contract length ended before the window that you're talking about. And, their primary job is to manage that window and make sure that window opens when in that 2 to 3 year time period when presumably Demidov will be hitting his prime, Hudson will be hitting his prime, Reinbacher perhaps will be hitting his, Fowler might be hitting his prime and might be the starting goaltender in Montreal. We'll see how that goes. But once all those things start happening and the actual young core of the team is really driving the bus, Caden Gooley has taken his final steps and has really established who he is, and all these guys. The one thing I think Canadiens fans should be assured of is that that's exactly the way that Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes see it. They're not going to mess with that. What they do between now and then is what we're talking about now, and what they're talking about likely now is let's get to that, and let's make sure that we continue progressing towards that, so that when that happens, our key guys have learned lessons like they learned this year in that Washington series. And then hopefully they can take those lessons next year. And as you mentioned, go 7 games or maybe even win a round and step by step by step. But I think that's the one thing that I feel relatively confident about this management group is that they're very acutely aware of when this team needs to be most relevant. Yep. It's not now. Yeah.
And the tough part in their job is that if this year, July 1st, they go after 1 or 2 guys 3 guys that they really like, and they are not able to get them, you have to restrain yourself not to go for the 4th or the 5th guy on your list that you don't really like. And that's dangerous. And that is really dangerous. You look at what happened with L'Avalanche in Denver. You know, they traded to get Brock Nelson. They felt that he was able to help them, but they didn't bring him to help them short-term only. They gave him a long-term deal because they felt that he was the guy. So when you see the trade and then you see the signing afterwards, okay, you realize that, McFarland said, this is, and went to Joe probably and said, I believe in this guy. We're going to pay for him and we're going to keep him. We're not going just to plug a hole with that type of guy. We want to keep him here. And that for me is going to be really interesting in Florida to see what's going to happen with a guy like Marchand. We already, Seth Jones is there for life, but Marchand was brought in, gave to the Florida Panthers, I believe, more, if not a lot more than they were expecting. And Bill Zito, who said that he would not work on Wednesday, but would start working yesterday on Thursday, I'm sure that he's trying to find a way to say, okay, should I spend some money on Marchand? Is he going to help me a long term? So I want to keep Bennett, and Bennett doesn't want to move. So is he going to accept a pay cut that will make him $8 million richer every year, which is my kind of pay cut that I would love to take. But, so if he stays there and he can keep Marchand and maybe let go Ekblad because Seth Jones will be able to take that slack for a while. And I don't know what they have in the farm team on the right side of the blue line. But anyway, I should have looked before. I'm sorry.
They got nothing. Yeah. I mean, they're Stanley Cup champions. Stanley Cup champions usually don't have anything waiting in the farm.
Anything, But that's it. That's what I meant. I mean, for the Canadiens, they have to have plan A, plan B, plan C, maybe plan D. But don't spend money and years on a guy that you are not convinced that is built for what you want to have and where you want to go. And for me, that's the biggest thing. Biggest thing.
Awesome. Well, Francois, thank you so much for coming on our show today. You mean a lot to me. You've been my mentor. I started my career on the beat with you as my senior partner. So it's always a lot of fun to not only reminisce of those years, but also seeing that after all this time, we still cross paths, and you're still so significant to me. So it's congratulations again on that honor, hugely deserved. And thanks for being with us today.
I'm happy to have done it. And as I said many times during the course of the last weeks, I've been lucky enough to cover the game that I love as a job. And that's been a blessing. But, the real pleasure of working with people don't understand how it is. Like, we are all together all the time. I don't travel as much as I used to, but we spend so much time together that we know things that on our personal lives that some other people should not even know.
No,
and
I was going to say.
and that makes it so great. I mean, there's the professional side, there's the personal side, and you combine that together. So for me, it's been a privilege to work with you guys for so many years. I don't know how many more years I have left, but it's still gonna be a privilege, and I'm ready to just tell you guys, hey, I'm leaving. Please kick me out of here.
No,
You are all better than I am, so
I am not.
I'm going away.
I'm not ready for that day. And I think 93% of my Francois Gagnon stories I would never say on a podcast in a public forum of any kind. They're
Please
all,
don't.
they know exactly. I would never do that because you're a dear friend and I would never do that to you. But yeah, so 90 to 95% of my stories with you have happened on the road and have involved something that is not worth repeating. So anyhow, so thank you so much and congratulations and so well deserved. And I can't wait to see your plaque in that building. I'm really, really excited to see that. You've meant a lot to me my whole career as well. A quarter century now that we've worked alongside each other at least. So cheers. Cheers, Francois. We'll to our water and we'll end the podcast with you chugging Coca-Cola. I want to see you chug not the whole bottle, but just down some Coca-Cola. Yeah, there you go.
I'll take the last one.
Finish that one, not your backup, not your fourth backup bottle. There you go. Cheers to you, Francois.
Thank you very much for everything, guys, and let's do this again whenever you want.
I can't wait.
Absolutely. So we'll be back on Monday for a regular episode. Arpin and I. Look at that.
Down the hatch, Frankie. Down the hatch. Love it.
Crazy. Yeah. So we'll be back on Monday for our regular episode for subscribers. So enjoy the weekend, everybody. And Francois, thanks again. Take care, everybody.
Merci.
Bye-bye.